The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Act was passed to help reduce the effects of workplace injuries and illness on workers. While logging is generally free from serious occupational disease, the rates of accidental injuries are very high, by some measures higher than those of any other business activity in the U.S. By February 9, 1995, all logging workers and supervisors must receive logging safety training at no cost to them. Here's how the training will affect loggers. All loggers must be trained for their specific jobs. Additional training is needed when new tasks are given or new equipment is furnished. And someone who acts unsafely must be given specific training to improve and correct that behavior. Loggers and supervisors hired after February 9, 1995, must receive training before they start work unless the employer determines from records of a prior employer they've been adequately trained on a previous job. In addition, at least monthly, safety and health meetings must be held, one-on-one in crew meetings or in larger groups. Every worker and supervisor must also have first aid training and CPR training. The employer shall assure that each employee's first aid and CPR training certificate remain current. Employers are not required to pay for the cost of first aid and CPR training, although many will elect to do so. Required content of logging training is comprehensive. First is a knowledge of how to handle general logging hazards. Second is the safe way to do work each logger is assigned. Third covers tools, machines, and vehicles. Fourth is safety measures which apply to the employer's worksite, such as which signals are to be used. Last is an understanding of OSHA logging safety standards. Following training, each logger must work under the close supervision of a designated person until the employer is satisfied that the logger has the ability to independently work safely. Each employer must keep a written certification record of training, including the name of the person trained and the signature of the person who did the training or the employer. Once you've been trained for a certain job, you don't have to repeat that training unless your employer has decided you've been acting unsafely. If you hire on another logging job, your new employer must find out whether you've been adequately trained on your last job. If not, you'll have to be retrained. If the prior training is acceptable to your new employer, you don't have to repeat it. Each logger must receive, understand, and retain information about how to work safely. But more important, after receiving the information, each logger must demonstrate on the job the ability to safely perform the work before that logger can be certified as trained. Every employee has a right to a copy of the OSHA logging safety standards. All it takes is a request to the employer. Now we'll cover recognition, prevention, and control of general logging hazards, which all loggers and supervisors should know. Electrical storms, strong winds that may affect the fall of a tree, heavy rain or snow, extreme cold, dense fog, fires, mudslides, and darkness can make conditions too hazardous to continue logging. The operation must shut down, and loggers must retreat to a safe location when environmental conditions create a hazard. Too many loggers have been injured by the actions of another crew member. On-the-job site workers must be spaced and their duties organized so that action by one person won't create a hazard for another person. Where there's manual or mechanical felling in progress, the required spacing is at least 2 tree lengths of the trees being felled. Tree length is defined as the actual height of a tree from the ground to and including the top. A greater distance from felling must be maintained on slopes where trees or logs are likely to slide or roll. As an example, when a skidder approaches a felling site, the operator must stop at a distance of at least 2 tree lengths and wait until the feller signals it's safe to approach. Tree length means the full height of the trees being harvested. Each logger must work in a position so that there's either visual or audible contact with another logger. There are many ways this requirement can be satisfied. If you can see each other or call out to each other, you're in contact. Although not specified, high visibility clothing and wearing high visibility vests will improve visual contact. Where there's engine noise, hand signals are acceptable. We'll tell more about these later. In dense brush or broken terrain, whistles or horns will serve the purpose. In some cases, such as where skidding distances are very long, personal radio communication will be necessary. Engine noise is not acceptable. For example, when you realize a chainsaw hasn't been running for a while, it's probably too late to help a cutter who's been injured. OSHA doesn't set forth a specific signal system. Each crew must have a communication system to use whenever noise, distance, restricted visibility, or other factors prevent good spoken communication. Here's an example of some hand signals which can be used between a choker setter and a skidder operator. However, any signal system of hand signals, horn or whistle signals, or radio contact is acceptable. The choice of signal system is up to the employer, but whatever system is chosen must be known and used by all crew members, and all should understand who should give signals and who should receive them. For instance, a choker setter should be the person to give signals to a skidder operator. Of course, in an emergency, signals to prevent problems or control hazards can be given by anyone. At the end of the workday, the employer or someone designated must account for all employees before leaving the job. Personal protective equipment can prevent an injury or reduce the severity of an injury. The employer must provide, at no cost to the employee, all required personal protective equipment except boots. Employees must pay for their own boots. The employer is also responsible that all personal protective equipment, including boots, is in serviceable condition at the beginning of each workday. Defective, damaged, or unserviceable equipment must be repaired or replaced before work starts. All loggers exposed to falling and flying objects must wear hard hats. A machine or vehicle operator need not wear the hard hat while within the protection of the cab, but must wear it when leaving the cab's protection. Logging machine operators and chainsaw operators must wear hearing protection, either earmuffs or earplugs, while the engine or motor is running. Eye protection is required wherever there's a hazard due to falling or flying objects. Where hazardous objects such as metal chips are present, safety glasses or goggles will provide the needed protection. Where chainsaw-produced wood chips are the hazard, logger-type mesh screens may be worn by employees performing chainsaw operations. Loggers who handle wire rope must wear hand protection, which provides adequate protection from puncture wounds, cuts, and lacerations. All loggers who use chainsaws must wear leg protection, either chaps, aprons, or trousers, which meets standards for such application and covers legs from the full length of the thigh to the top of the boot. Foot protection, such as heavy-duty logging boots, must be worn by all logging employees, and the employer does not have to purchase them for the employee. The boots must be waterproof or water repellent,
and cover and provide support for the ankles. Each employee who operates a chainsaw must wear foot protection constructed with cut-resistant material which will protect the employee against contact with a running chainsaw. The employer is responsible for deciding whether caulk-soled or other slip-resistant boots are needed.
Boots lined with chainsaw-resistant fabric are available and a worthy investment.
First aid kits which are properly equipped must be made available at each site where trees are being cut, at each active landing, and on each employee transport vehicle. The employer is responsible for stocking and maintaining these kits, and as previously stated, all loggers must be qualified in first aid and CPR. Each first aid kit should contain directions for getting emergency assistance, such as phone numbers for summoning an ambulance or helicopter, and location of the nearest hospital.
Every logger from time to time must use hand or portable power tools to adjust, maintain, or repair equipment ranging from saws to heavy machinery. Even if the worker brings his or her own tools or equipment to the job, it's the responsibility of the employer to make sure they are in safe and serviceable condition. A chainsaw is a portable power tool. Tool handles, guards, and all other safety devices must be sound, tight-fitting, properly shaped, free of splinters and sharp edges, in place, and functioning properly. Controls of portable power tools must function properly. Impact tools, such as wedges, shall be dressed to remove any mushrooming. Cutting tools shall be kept sharp and properly shaped according to manufacturer's instructions. Tools must be used only for the purposes for which they were intended. When tools are carried on a vehicle, they must be secured, such as in racks, boxes, or holsters, so they don't create a hazard for workers. There must be a proper storage place or facility for all tools, and they must be stored there when not needed at the work site. Tools must be checked during use for continued safe conditions, and when they no longer meet the safe conditions for handles, cutting edges, or have mushroomed surfaces, they must be repaired or removed from use. OSHA has specific requirements for storage, handling, labeling, and transportation of fuels, oil, and other flammable and combustible liquids.
OSHA permits chainsaw fuels to be carried in UL-approved plastic or metal safety cans having a maximum capacity of 5 gallons. However, these liquids must not be transported in any driver or passenger-occupied area of a machine or vehicle. Each machine, vehicle, and portable power tool must be shut off during fueling, except diesel-powered machines and vehicles, which may be fueled while they are at idle.
No logging activity, including transport of logging equipment from one job site to another, can be done close enough to electric power lines to risk injury. The employer must make the decision about what distance is safe. OSHA sets rigid standards for using explosives. It's the employer's responsibility to be certain this activity is safely conducted. No review of safety requirements can cover every logging hazard situation. When there are other general logging safety needs that apply to all loggers and supervisors, to a particular tract or forest region, or to your own logging job, these should be covered by training after the end of this video. Attitude is important. Everyone should view training as an opportunity and a privilege which improves efficiency and status of the logging profession, and can make the general public more appreciative of loggers and logging. There's no room in the profession for those who use prohibited drugs or alcohol to the extent that job performance is affected. If you use prescription or over-the-counter drugs, you should seek medical advice on whether or not you can safely work or operate a logging machine or vehicle. We've covered logging safety issues which are important for all loggers and supervisors, such as stopping work in bad weather conditions, maintaining safe distances between workers, keeping visual or audible contact, use of a common signal system, the personal protective equipment required, first aid kits and training required, safe condition and use of hand and portable power tools, and safe handling of combustible liquids. We also covered the requirements for safety when near overhead electric power lines and in those unusual situations where blasting is required. The foregoing training subject matter comes under a general heading and is required for all loggers and supervisors. There are 3 other segments which follow and detail requirements for those who operate logging machines, who use chainsaws, or drive vehicles. You should now review what's been covered and be sure you understand what's required. If necessary, rewind the tape and run through it again. OSHA defines logging machines as stationary and mobile equipment with self-contained power plant operated off-road and used to move material. Specifically excluded are cars, buses, trucks, trailers, or semi-trailers, which OSHA classes as vehicles. This video will cover OSHA requirements for which training is required of machine operators. All loggers, including machine operators, must be trained in the general requirements in the first video section, and if the machine operators also use chainsaws, even if only occasionally, they must be trained based on the content of the chainsaw operations video section. Each machine operator must become familiar with the operating instructions which are provided by the manufacturer. These describe operation, maintenance, and safe practices. Both operators and those workers who maintain the equipment must comply with the safety precautions in the manuals. There are a wide variety of logging machines in use, and each has unique needs to assure safe operation and maintenance. The manuals which detail operating and maintenance must be available on the machine or in the area where it's used, and these manufacturers' instructions must be complied with. On most newer machines, there's a protective box for the manual. This is the safety alert symbol. When you see this symbol in the manual or other type of safety warning emphasis, be alert to the possibility of personal injury or death. Follow recommended precautions and safe operating practices. Machines are also often equipped with decals or other signs which further warn of hazards. Danger identifies the hazard or unsafe practice that will result in severe injury or death. Warning identifies the hazard or unsafe practice that could result in severe injury or death. Caution identifies the hazard or unsafe practice that could result in minor injury or property damage. OSHA specifies that machine operator and maintenance workers' safety training be based on manufacturer's instructions. We can't detail these in this video. The employer will have to provide the manuals and see that training based on them is conducted. The precautions in the manuals which are accompanied by safety alert symbols or otherwise featured are the most important. All machines except those which are capable of 360-degree rotation must be equipped with ROPS and FOPS protective structures. Knuckle boom loaders rotate full circle and are exempt. Cab enclosures and dimensions are detailed. Of course, a machine operator isn't responsible for the initial adequacy of a machine's protective structure. However, when there's a defect or damage, the operator should report this to a supervisor immediately. In particular, damaged transparent material such as Lexan or safety glass which can create a hazard must be reported and replaced. Operators are required to keep transparent materials clean to assure operator visibility. Walking and working surfaces must be kept clear of material and debris such as limbs, leaves, mud, snow and ice, which could contribute to slipping or falling or create a fire hazard. Before starting to use a machine, OSHA requires the operator to check it over thoroughly to be certain that any defects or problems which might affect its safe operation are corrected. For many machines, the operator's manual will specify a walk-around inspection, which includes the points where safety is a concern. OSHA also requires that defects or damage be repaired before operation is commenced. Guarding is required where workers are exposed to moving elements such as shafts, pulleys, belts, and gears. Your inspection should make sure these are in place and undamaged. A machine's brakes must be able to hold it and its load on the terrain where it's operated. Don't operate the machine if the brakes can't hold it.
Logging machines must also be equipped with secondary brakes that are capable of stopping the machine regardless of the direction of travel or whether the engine is running, in addition to parking brakes that are capable of holding a stopped machine stationary.
When inspecting the machine, make sure the exhaust pipe and muffler are in place, undamaged, and secure. Use handholds and steps. Falling is one of the major causes of personal injury. When you get on and off the machine, always maintain a 3-point contact with the steps and handholds and face the machine. Don't jump on or off the machine. Don't dismount a moving machine. Damaged steps, handholds, guardrails, and catwalks should be promptly repaired or replaced. OSHA requires that a machine only be started and operated by a designated person, someone qualified by knowledge, training, and experience. Equipment controls should be checked to be sure they respond and function correctly. Use of seat belts, securely and tightly fastened, is required on machines. Seat belts cannot be removed and must be maintained in a serviceable condition or replaced. On most logging machines, there's only room inside the protective compartment for the operator himself. No riders are permitted on loads or anywhere on the machine. Saplings or limbs which enter the machine operator's compartment are a major source for operator injury. Many new machines are fully enclosed and provide good protection from spears. Spear prevention helps. Take time to clear potential spears from the trail when you're traveling empty. Where the potential for spear entry is present, operators should continually scan ahead and to the sides, adjust speed to meet conditions, and be prepared to detour or stop before a spear enters the compartment. Each machine must be equipped with a portable fire extinguisher, and it must be maintained and replenished as indicated by the gauge. Fire prevention measures should include regularly cleaning out the operator's compartment And on your daily walk-around inspection, remove collected debris on or around the machine. OSHA prohibits carrying fuel or other flammable or combustible liquid in the operator's compartment.
Each machine must be shut off during fueling except diesel-powered machines which may be fueled while at idle.
Electric transmission lines often run through forested areas. Equipment must be operated at safe distances from these power lines to avoid electrocution. The operator should be certain the supervisor is aware of the presence of a power line in the working area and should follow the supervisor's instructions on the distance to be maintained. There is no piece of logging equipment which can't be turned over, particularly on steep ground. Operators must learn what the stability limitations of the machine they handle are and take steps not to exceed them. Operators must learn the load capacity of their machine and not exceed it. When a machine is to be transported on a truck, the truck's rated load capacity must not be exceeded, and the machine must be loaded, secured, and unloaded so that it will not create a hazard for any employee.
Before you leave the operator's station of a machine, you must set the parking brake, place the transmission in park, and lower all elements such as piling blade, grapple, or felling head to the ground. Only those moving elements that may pose a hazard to employees after the machine is shut down need to have stored energy discharged.
OSHA has a general standard that states that a machine shall be operated at such a distance from employees and other machines that such operations will not create a hazard for an employee. The most specific distance is twice tree length from active felling. There's also a hazard when a skidder encounters a person on foot on the skid trail. The safe practice is to stop until the worker on foot is well clear of machine and load. Loader operators must not pass the load or boom over or near ground workers. Check yarding area, landing areas, and skidding trails for hazards. Inspect the surface over which you will travel so that you can avoid hazards. Look for stumps, rocks, holes, drop-offs, and slide areas. Look for steep slopes and gullies, brush piles, and excessive debris. Be aware of springs, mud holes, creeks, and standing water. Many operators have been injured by trailside spears entering the cab area. Operate to avoid hazardous situations or use other means to control or remove them. Chokers must be set near the end of a log or tree length. The choker setter must work from the uphill side when either hooking or unhooking chokers. There's an exception, but only if the employer specifically can demonstrate it's not feasible to hook or unhook from the uphill side, and then the log must be secured to prevent rolling, sliding, or swinging. The skidder must be positioned during winching so that machine and winch are within their design limits. Winching shall not be done until all workers are in the clear. When approaching the landing area, be extremely cautious. Look out for personnel on foot who may be delimbing or bucking logs. Warn them of your presence and wait for them to get completely out of the way. Where a landing worker is in a position where your travel could create a hazard, wait until he stops what he's doing, gets in the clear, and signals you that it's all right to move. At all times, operate with safe clearance from all obstructions. OSHA requires that the load be placed where it doesn't create a hazard for a worker and in an orderly manner so trees are stable before bucking and limbing are performed. Next, we'll cover OSHA safety standards which apply to loading and unloading in the forest. Trucks must be positioned with safe working clearance between the truck and the decked logs or tree lengths. Only essential workers are permitted in the work area while loading and unloading are going on. In most cases, this will mean only the loader operator. Other workers are permitted in the work area only when the employer demonstrates it's essential. In practical terms, this means that limbing and topping can't be done in the hazard zone around the loader while the loader is operating. Truck drivers must exit the truck cab during loading or unloading if the logs are carried or moved over the cab. There's an exception only if the employer decides it's necessary for the driver to stay in the cab, such as to read the onboard weigh scale, and then the cab must be reinforced by additional overhead guarding. While not a specific OSHA requirement, it's a good practice to require dismounted truck drivers to stay well clear of active loading and unloading and in a location where the loader operator can see them. If the truck is equipped with trip stakes, the release device must be located on the side opposite from where the load will fall. These are some OSHA standards specific to unloading in the woods. It's permitted to release the load binders or tie-downs when the load is not higher than the stakes or load standards, provided the stakes are of sufficient strength to hold shifting or moving logs. We interpret the strength requirements to exclude wooden stake extensions because they are often not strong enough to hold a log. However, if the load is not contained by the standards as just described, the employer must provide some other means to secure the load before binders are released. OSHA has more detailed safety standards which apply to unloading at pulp mills and sawmills. For maximum safety, loader operators should never load over the standards. All standards should be made of steel and in good condition. Stakes should be inspected for cracks and weld failures and repaired or replaced if faulty. Releasing binders must be done only from the side where the unloading machine operates. There are exceptions when the release is done by remote control or when the employee making the release is otherwise protected by racks or stanchions, such as found on some mill woodyards. Machines which are stationary while doing the work for which they are intended, such as knuckle boom loaders, must have their stabilizers down during operation or be otherwise anchored or stabilized to prevent movement. Following are some safety recommendations for knuckle boom loaders, which in some areas exceed OSHA requirements but are strongly recommended by manufacturers. A loader operator is in an elevated position with visibility all around and responsible for the safety of workers on the ground. Don't raise or swing logs, pulpwood, or any load over or near workers on the ground. The operator should maintain eye contact and spot where other employees, including truck drivers, are standing. Logs can roll quite a distance or can fall off a pile. Never throw logs or trash into an area until you are absolutely sure every person, machine, or vehicle is completely clear. Don't try to pinch a log with the grapple tips to lift or move. Close the grapple completely around the log or logs to prevent slipping or dropping. When using a pulpwood grapple, make sure that you grapple a full load so that there is pressure on the entire bundle. It is dangerous to overfill or underfill the grapple, as loose wood can fall out. A loader should have a horn in good working order to signal the start of operation. Other horn and hand signals must be understood by all crew members. Failure to correctly respond to a signal could result in severe injury or death for you or those around you. Don't allow a landing worker to trim a log which is suspended by the loader. Place the log on the ground in a safe, clear area. Do not move the log until the deckhand is completely clear of the work area. Machines which are used in woods for debarking, limbing, and chipping must be equipped with guarding to protect workers from flying logs, chips, wood chunks, bark, limbs, and other material. And these guards must be in place when the machine is in operation. The following standards are specific to in-woods chippers.
All chipper operators must wear both eye and face protection.
Access doors or covers must not be opened until the disc or drum has come to a complete stop. In-feed and discharge ports must be guarded to prevent contact with the disc, knives, or blower blades. Chippers must be shut down and locked out before any servicing or maintenance work is done in the in-feed area. Detached trailer-type chippers must be chocked while operating on any slope where rolling or sliding of the chipper is possible. Where logs are stored, the deck must be located and built so stored material is stable and with enough room so that workers can safely move and work in the area. There are some safety recommendations for feller bunchers. OSHA requires that no employee approach a mechanical feller closer than 2 tree lengths of the tree being felled until the operator signals it's safe to do so. Manufacturers recommend a minimum of 300 feet separation distance when the machine uses a high-speed disc saw head. On feller buncher operations, as with operations of other machines, don't exceed cutting, accumulation, or carrying capacity. Observe the stability limitations of the machine in steep and uneven terrain. When on slopes, it's best to move uphill and downhill and avoid turns or felling a tree at an angle in a situation where overturn might occur. Operators should be alert to overhead dangers such as dead snags, hung trees, and large limbs. Do not leave hung trees. Safely use the felling attachment to push a hung tree to the ground. Use your protected position inside the cab and the abilities of your machine to remove or control hazards which could endanger other workers. To stop a rotating disc, place the bottom of disc on a stump. Leave the cab only after the saw head disc has stopped. If the head must be suspended, place metal stops on the hydraulic cylinder rods to prevent leak down or sudden fall due to loss of hydraulic pressure, and place stable blocks under the head. Be sure to include in your training the additional precautions set forth in the operation and maintenance manuals for your machine. There's no list of rules which will stop all accidental injuries in logging, but compliance with the OSHA safety standards will stop many of them and avoid serious injuries in other cases. If a new or unusual situation comes up where you think there could be a hazard and it's hard to decide how to overcome the problem, there's a final procedure we recommend. Stop and study the situation. Try to find a safer and better way. Ask for advice and help from your supervisor. There's always a solution, and you can find it. These are the safety standards which, in addition to the general standards, apply to logging equipment operators. We suggest you review what you've seen and heard, and if there are questions, run through this section of the video again to reinforce what you've heard. Before we review requirements specific to chainsaws and their use, we remind you that the general requirements which apply to all loggers also apply to chainsaw operations. For all practical purposes, all saws must have a functioning chain brake. Alternate anti-kickback devices such as nose guards, banana bar, or anti-kickback saw chain are permitted for saws purchased before February 1995, which weren't manufactured with a chain brake. You can test whether your brake is functioning properly by first setting it by hand with the saw running to be sure it stops chain movement. Second, if your brake is automatically stopped by inertia while the saw is shut down, let the nose of the bar drop about 14 inches onto a stump or log to be sure inertia sets the brake. Several other chainsaw safety features are important. The continuous pressure throttle control system, or throttle lock, must stop chain travel when released. The chain catcher must be in place and in effective condition. Chain tension must be kept adjusted to the manufacturer's requirements. Chain must be filed as recommended by the manufacturer whenever it becomes dull. The muffler must be operational and in place. OSHA requires that chainsaws be operated and adjusted according to manufacturer's instructions. This means you'll have to get the booklet from your chainsaw dealer, read and understand it, and follow the recommendations specific for your saw. In general, manufacturers suggest that filters be cleaned daily. The bar and chain should be checked daily for defects, adjustments, chain sharpening, and when needed, setting rakers. The brake, chain catcher, and throttle lock need daily inspection and, if found faulty, immediate repair before use. And of course, all handles and guards should be functional and in place. Periodic carburetor tuning is important to keep a saw cutting with highest efficiency. Follow manufacturer's recommendations on bar and chain maintenance. Adhering to the correct filing angles will help avoid kickback. Manufacturers also give guidance on maintenance which can be done on a weekly or monthly basis. Since there's considerable variation between makes and models, and the steps involved are principally to increase saw life and operating efficiency, we'll not detail them in this video. The rest of this video will cover chainsaw operation.
When fueling the saw, be sure you're at least 10 feet from an open flame or other ignition source.
You must also start the saw at a distance of at least 10 feet from where you fueled it. OSHA requires an approved first aid kit be handy at the location where felling is being done. Before starting the saw, make sure it's secure. Engage the chain brake before you pull the starter cord. Some prefer to start it on the ground. Some find a stump or other raised position. It's safe to start the saw standing up if you hold the rear handle firmly between your upper thighs and have a firm grip with your left hand on the forward handle. You should keep your left arm straight and elbow locked. Don't jump start. In all cases, the brake must be set before starting. Carry your saw so that the chain and muffler don't touch your body. A chainsaw must be shut down or the brake engaged whenever it's being carried over 50 feet. This distance factor should be reduced in difficult terrain, thick underbrush, or slippery walking conditions. Let's cover all the situations where a chain brake is required to be used and some where it's recommended only. First, while starting the saw. Second, when carrying a running saw more than 50 feet.
OSHA requires that a saw be shut off or the throttle released before a feller starts his retreat. It's even more certain to stop chain travel by setting the brake.
Although OSHA sets a 50-foot carrying distance without the need to set the brake, it's a good habit to set the brake even when the carrying distance is short. Whenever you release one hand from the saw, it's a good idea to first set the brake. An example is when you need a hand free to get some brush you've trimmed away from your work area or while clearing your escape path. When the chainsaw is in use, it must be gripped by both hands with the thumbs and fingers encircling the handles. A chainsaw must not be used to cut directly overhead, and it's an even safer practice to not use it to cut above shoulder height. Correct body position is important to avoid muscle or back strain and to keep firm control over the saw. Kneel or squat when felling and get your shoulder in against the tree. Rest your arm against your knee or thigh to provide support and better control of the saw. A chainsaw operator makes certain his footing is secure and his body in balance before starting a cut. The saw must not be used in a position or at a distance that could cause you to lose balance, have insecure footing, or a less than firm grip on the saw. To avoid kickback, know and control the saw's reactive forces. On the top of the bar, the forward running chain wants to push the saw towards you. At the bottom, the reactive force is pull. The upper forward corner of the bar nose is the hazardous kickback zone. Let's look now at what else is required for safe, professional felling. It's very important that everyone else keep their distance, and that's at least twice the length of trees being felled. Tree length is the same as tree height. On steep slopes or where timber is spaced very closely, more distance may be needed. The law puts the responsibility on other crew members to keep this distance away from a chainsaw operator felling trees. Crew members on foot or operating equipment must stay twice the length of the trees being felled until the feller has signaled or told the crew member it's safe to come closer. If a fellow worker forgets and you spot him, shut the saw down. Give warning if he's moving into a hazardous position and ask him to keep the twice tree length distance next time until he's able to get your attention. While other workers have the responsibility to keep at least 2 tree lengths from active felling, the feller is also responsible to avoid felling a tree which could create a hazard for another crew member or strike a rope, cable, power line, machine, or vehicle. Plan your felling pattern carefully. Wherever possible, aim to fell a tree in the clear to avoid hang-up or striking snags or dead limbs which could be thrown back at you. Danger trees are a major cause of feller injury and death. OSHA defines danger trees as lodge trees and snags. Setback trees and live trees with overhanging dead limbs also are dangerous. There are 3 alternative ways to handle danger trees: fell, remove, or avoid. Before felling or removing a danger tree, it should be checked for loose bark, broken branches and limbs, or other damage. If there's a hazard for employees, these defects should be removed or held in place before other work on the danger tree is begun. Felling or removal usually should be done mechanically. This means using a skidder or other machine to push or pull the danger tree to the ground. OSHA also permits other techniques of felling or removal that minimize employee exposure. Examples are severing one side of the hinge on a lodged tree to roll it out, driving a wedge to fell a setback tree, and felling a snag with a saw when it's solid and clean overhead. Often there's not a safe way to fell or remove the danger tree immediately. For instance, when the skidder won't return to the felling site for a while. Then the danger tree must be avoided. OSHA defines the steps required to safely avoid a danger tree. First, it must be marked. Flagging is the best, but any other means of marking which is understood by crew members is acceptable. Second, all work must be done at 2 tree lengths distance from the danger tree until it has been felled or removed. There are some requirements for safe felling. Before starting to fell a tree, you should look at the trees around it. There's a chance that the sequence you use, which tree you fell first, which second, and so on, will be important to avoid creating a hazard for yourself, save your energy, and help you fell in the best direction for limbing and bucking, for instance, or make setting chokers easier. As you approach the chosen tree and before starting the face cut, look up and judge the lean of the tree and probable influence of the crown on felling direction. Judge the wind direction and strength. Fell with the wind when you can, but don't attempt felling in high winds, and use extreme care when winds are gusty and shifting direction. Your appraisal should include all potential hazards on or near the tree you want to fell, including dead limbs, defects such as rot, tying vines and limbs, and the location of other trees. Where snow or ice are present on a tree and create a hazard, they must be removed or the area must be avoided. Your appraisal should result in a felling plan, which includes all the steps you will take to fell the tree. If you're felling in steep ground, you must plan your work so that you remain uphill from or at the same level as previously felled trees. If there is a spring pole or other tree under stress in the felling area, no person other than the feller can be closer than the 2 tree length distance when the stress is relieved. When cutting a spring pole, place yourself out of the likely path of the release and use a series of shallow cuts to relieve the tension. The first element of the plan includes all the steps you will take to avoid injury based on your appraisal. You may need to fell or remove a snag, cut some vines, remove snow or ice, clear some brush, or take other hazard control measures around the tree, such as clearing brush or low limbs, or cutting potential spring poles in the path where it will fall. To control the fall, decide on details of the undercut and back cut and the thickness of the hinge. These decisions are based on the lean, wind conditions, and tree size and species. And decide where your escape paths should be. First, accomplish your planned hazard reduction steps. Then, clear your retreat path. The best route for a retreat path is diagonally back from the rear extension of your planned felling line. Before you start making the felling cuts, clear away limbs, brush, or other obstacles which might interfere with cutting the tree. The undercut or face cut, sometimes called the notch, is the first cut and is made in the side of the tree towards the direction of fall. It is required by OSHA law. There are several kinds of face cuts. The conventional face cut is most common, and here's what it looks like. The Humboldt cut, used mainly in large timber and where butt log value is high, looks like this. The open face cut, a modern method designed to control the falling tree all the way down to the ground, looks like this. OSHA requires only that the undercut be of a size that the tree won't split and will fall in its intended direction. As a rule of thumb, an undercut should be no deeper than 80% of the diameter of the tree at the place you're undercutting. The two cuts of the undercut should meet exactly, and for good control of the tree as it falls, be at an angle of 70 degrees or more. For accurate development of the hinge, the two cuts should meet. If one bypasses the other, you'll weaken the hinge and can lose control of the fall direction. For some fellers, the method of making an undercut is based on old tradition and hand tools. A hand saw was used to make the lower cut and an axe to chop out the notch. For these woodsmen, it was easy to be sure that all of the face cut was removed and a clean face cut made up to the beginning of the hinge with no bypass. With the power of today's chainsaw and using the old sequence of lower cut first, unfortunately, it's common to overcut, make a bypass, and weaken the hinge. However, if you just make one change and do the top cut first, when you make the lower cut, it's so easy to look in the opening of the top cut, see exactly when the saw chain appears, and withdraw the saw. It takes no more work to make a perfect undercut, and by doing so, you can make a good hinge, avoid bypass, control the fall of the tree, and avoid many serious injuries. The OSHA law doesn't require that the top cut of the undercut be made first, but we suggest you try it. Once it becomes a habit, we're sure you'll never return to the handsaw and axe face cut method. OSHA requires a back cut be made in each tree being felled. Further, it's required that the back cut create a hinge which will guide the fall of the tree and prevent premature slipping or twisting off the stump. The hinge is the key to safe felling. It should be about the same thickness along its length. How thick a hinge should be depends on tree species and diameter. As you're felling, judge hinge thickness until you get it right. A hinge is correct if it stays intact during most of the tree's fall. Don't bypass your undercuts or back cut, or you'll destroy the hinge. It's also required that the back cut be above the level where the two cuts of the undercut meet. There's an exception where you're winching or pulling a tree over. With these trees, a back cut lower than the apex of the face cut will help keep the butt from kicking out while the tree is being winched. All professional chainsaw operators know about, and most practice, a number of time-tested ways to fell problem trees. Wedges are excellent tools, particularly for felling against the lean, and top professionals won't work without them. A variety of methods, such as corner cuts and boring cuts, are used to avoid pulling splinters out of valuable butt logs and to more accurately build a hinge. These and other useful and practical techniques are not required by OSHA. OSHA requires an appraisal of the tree before felling begins, and use of both a correct face cut and back cut. The rest of the methods are up to you.
When you complete the back cut and the tree begins to fall, you must release the throttle or shut down the saw before using your retreat path. Although not required, we suggest you get in the habit of engaging the chain brake to be certain chain movement is stopped. OSHA requires that a retreat or escape path diagonally back from the expected fall direction be planned and cleared. Once the back cut has been made, the feller shall immediately move a safe distance away from the tree on the retreat path. Always keep an eye on the falling tree and be ready for the unexpected. Most fellers who were killed were within 10 feet of the stump.
Most chainsaw operators, in addition to felling, buck logs or bolt wood into merchantable lengths. Some chainsaw operators only buck and limb down trees in the woods or piled at or near the landing.
When bucking and limbing is done on slopes, it's hazardous to work downhill of felled trees. OSHA requires employees to work on the uphill side when it's reasonably foreseeable that the tree or logs might roll or slide on top of them while limbing or bucking.
Wind-thrown and storm-damaged timber presents special hazards. Root wads and tree trunks partially down and under stress can be very tricky to cut safely, and planning to avoid the unexpected is required. It may be necessary to chalk a tree or move it to a safer position with a skidder. Trees and limbs under stress should be carefully released by cutting so that release is gradual and controlled. Where limbing is done by chainsaw, the same rules for handling limbs or saplings under stress, commonly called spring poles, must apply. Be sure other workers are at least 2 tree lengths away. Release the stress gradually while standing in a safe position where a sudden movement won't strike you. Unusual hazards in felling occur when cables, power lines, and other equipment or man-made structures are nearby, and additional care must be taken to be certain falling trees don't hit these objects. If you do hit a power line, you and all others must stay clear of the area, and your employer must notify the power company. Do not return to the area to commence work until the power company says it's safe to do so. Although it's not required, professional loggers try to keep the tree trunk between them and the area they're limbing as much as possible. It's also easier work and provides better control to rest the saw engine on the trunk while limbing. Sometimes trees are brought to the landing to be bucked. Before bucking, make sure the trees are piled so that they'll be stable when you work on them. If there's a question, get the skidder or other equipment to rearrange the pile so it's safe to work on. Chainsaw operators sometimes find extremely and unusually hazardous conditions, life-threatening sorts of things that they've not run into before and don't really know how to handle safely. We hope this never happens to you, but if it does, stop and go ask for the advice and the decision of your immediate supervisor. 2 heads are better than 1 in this type of emergency situation. If you're not sure, ask for help. It's up to the supervisor of each logging job to be certain that all chainsaw operators know how to follow OSHA safety standards. They're not just for safety. They present easier and better ways to do the job. The OSHA requirements don't cover everything a chainsaw operator needs to know in order to handle situations like a tree with a heavy lean or a hollow core, forked trees, and so forth. A bore cut back cut is a good way to control a tree with a heavy forward lean. It takes practice and accurately sharpened chain to bore cut safely. The correct use of wedges can help you avoid setback or saw pinching in the back cut on a balanced or back-leaning tree. You should take advantage of local training sessions and logging safety videos and publications to increase skill levels beyond the basic OSHA requirements. This ends the portion of safety training which applies to chainsaw operations. We suggest you review now what you've seen and heard, and if there are questions, run through the video again to reinforce what you've heard.
OSHA defines vehicles as including cars, trucks, buses, trailers, or semi-trailers owned, leased, or rented by the employer and used for transporting employees or moving materials.
The vehicles covered include all those used to transport any employee off public roads or to perform any logging operation, which can include hauling logs and transporting logging machines from one job to another. The employer must be certain that vehicles are maintained in serviceable condition by inspection before initial use each work shift. For haul trucks, this pre-trip or walk-around inspection is also required by federal highway regulations. Defects or damage must be repaired or the vehicle replaced before work starts. The employer must make certain that operating and maintenance instructions are available in each vehicle and that drivers and maintenance employees comply with these instructions. The regulations require inspection of pickups and cars as well as haul trucks. Manufacturer's instructions. Their operators' booklets will list inspections of windows, mirrors, lights, and reflectors. Check tire pressure and condition and look for fluid leaks. Check warning lights and gauges. Throughout, you'll find specific cautions and warnings about safety during maintenance. When jump starting, be sure to follow the recommended hookup sequence. You'll also find instructions for safe use of the jack. Log truck drivers' inspection procedures call for a walk around the truck to check the safe condition of wheel bearing and hubs. At each wheel, check suspension and brake components. Look for fluid leaks. At the front, check steering system, windshield, lights, and reflectors. Proceeding around the truck, the drive shaft, exhaust system, frame and cross members, and air hydraulic and electrical lines are checked. At the rear, lights and reflectors are covered. Standards and bolsters are checked to be sure they're in good condition. After going all around the truck, the driver gets in the cab and checks gauges and control functions. It only takes a few minutes, but can save a lot of trouble and make it possible to fix problems before it's too late. We'll not attempt to cover these manuals in full detail in this video. For vehicle operators and maintenance workers to be qualified as trained, the manuals must be acquired and training on their content given. The employer must also make sure that drivers have valid licenses for the class of vehicle operated. Haul truck drivers must have qualified for a commercial driver's license. OSHA specifically requires that vehicles meet some very specific safety standards. Vehicles which were equipped with seat belts at the time of manufacture must continue to be equipped with equivalent seat belts which are maintained in serviceable condition. Removed seat belts must be replaced. Brakes must be able to hold the vehicle and its rated load capacity on the slopes over which it is driven. The emergency or park brake must be able to stop the vehicle and keep it parked regardless of direction of travel or whether the engine is running. Where necessary, mounting steps and handholds are required to prevent injury when entering or leaving a vehicle. Vehicle seats must be securely fastened. Before starting or moving any vehicle, the driver must make sure no employee is in the path of the vehicle. Moving vehicles must maintain a safe distance from employees and other vehicles and machines. A vehicle must be loaded, secured, and unloaded so that it won't create a hazard for any employee. The rated load capacity of a vehicle must not be exceeded. For haul trucks, the load capacity is, for practical purposes, the legal highway load limit.
Before the operator leaves the vehicle's cab, the parking or emergency brake should be applied, the transmission placed in park, and each moving element such as a truck-mounted loader boom on a self-loading truck or a snowplow on a pickup must be lowered to the ground or otherwise secured.
Fuel, oil, or other flammable and combustible liquids cannot be carried in the driver compartment or any passenger-occupied area of a vehicle. Many of the requirements for loading and unloading machine operation also apply to drivers of haul trucks, and we'll cover them next. Truck drivers must stay in the clear unless the employer can demonstrate it's essential they be in the work area. As a general rule, if logs or loads are moved over the truck cab, the haul truck driver must exit the cab unless the employer demonstrates it's essential to be in the cab, such as for reading the onboard weigh scale instrument, and then some sort of cab reinforcement must be provided. If the vehicle or trailer is equipped with trip stakes, they must be able to be tripped from the side opposite the fall of the load. Tie-downs or binders can only be released from the side on which the unloading machine operates unless the release is by remote control, or the employee making the release is protected by racks or stanchions strong enough to withstand the force of the logs. Truck drivers must be sure binders are tight before moving the load. Before leaving the woods road, the driver must again stop, check all binders, and tighten those that need it. While not an OSHA logging training requirement, every driver should know and practice defensive driving methods. Some of these principles are: scan your environment, look ahead and to the sides, frequently check your right and left mirrors. Don't let the careless actions of other drivers get under your skin. Laugh it off. Cool it down. You need to stay calm and alert to be a professional defensive driver. When the video ends, you should review what's required of vehicles and vehicle operators. It may be helpful to view this section again.